This is Grace Notes, and I'm Alan Button. Our guest today is Dr. Larry Dempsey. Larry is a retired pediatric dentist who, among other things, has spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. Larry is on the board of Costa Rica Mission Project and is our guest this evening to tell us a little bit about what he does and why he does it. Larry, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Larry, if we could, let me have you start with a little bit of your background in terms of where you're from originally and your schooling and how you got into pediatric dentistry.
My wife, Suzanne, and I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. She went to the University of North Carolina. I went to Duke. So far, that hadn't been a problem. I was about 3 years ahead of her in school, and when I finished Duke, I enrolled in dental school at the University of North Carolina, and we got married after my first year in dental school, and she taught in the Durham public school system while I finished dental school, and we decided to stay 2 additional years in Chapel Hill, and I got a master's degree in pediatric dentistry. I graduated in June of 1975, and I had friends who had finished ahead of me in dental school who had come to practice in the Rocky Mount area, and there was not a pediatric dentist in northeastern North Carolina at the time, and so they recruited me to come down and help with the treatment of children. So in June of 1975, my wife, with a 2-week-old son, a dog, and a pile of debt, moved to Rocky Mount.
Debt, dog, and a child.
Exciting times, I think you would call them.
Your focus on pediatric dentistry, tell us just briefly what that consists of.
In the course of a dental school education, you receive a certain amount of pediatric dentistry, just like you do crown and bridge work, different specialties within dentistry. And I decided early on that pediatric dentistry was where I was supposed to be. I didn't like dealing with old folks. I didn't like dealing with people who were set in their ways. Mm-hmm. And children would just, every day was kind of a new day. And they're the best dental patients in the world. If you've ever been in a pediatric dental practice, comparing it to an adult practice where you go into a small room and you're there by yourself with the dentist and an assistant. In a pediatric dental practice, I had 6 chairs in one room. And so we just let the kids walk around and see dentistry being done, and it was kind of organized mayhem, and it was a neat thing to do, and the kids liked it. They liked seeing things done and explaining things, and that is kind of the standard in pediatric dentistry, open-based situations and letting kids be a part of the whole thing.
Well, I understand from what we were talking about before we came in the studio that you were a busy guy in those early years, both with your practice and a growing family.
We were. I was like most folks my age that came out of school with a lot of debt, so we were concentrating on building a practice. We had 3 kids, and they all were athletes, so it seemed like every waking hour was either a practice or a game, or I was at work. And it was busy, but it was kind of a fun busy because we knew we were growing, we knew the practice was growing, and the kids were growing up. I mean, there were moments when we wanted to kill them all, but it was a good time.
How'd you find time in those years to get to Costa Rica?
By the blessings of a nice wife.
Uh-huh. Suzanne.
Suzanne was good. Our church had just changed senior ministers, and the church had been involved in missions work, nothing overseas, but locally for a number of years. But the new pastor's wife had been involved in overseas ministry. So when they came to town, she started promoting a trip the following January. They came in June, the following January, to Costa Rica. And they had some fundraisers to raise money to fund it. And of course, there was, who's going to go on this trip? And there was a lot of talk. One of my best friends was going to go, and he kept after me to go. And I just said, the practice is just overwhelming right now. The kids have got this, that, and the other. I cannot go. In 2020 hindsight, those are all the reasons that you really should go. But I didn't go, and that was in 1990, the first year of the missions trips.
Tell you what, we'll come back to what got you there the first time in just a couple of minutes. You've mentioned Suzanne. You've identified a song, My Girl by the Temptations. Tell us what's special about that.
Well, it was a very popular song when we were in college. The Temptations were a very popular group. In fact, we were fortunate enough they actually came to Durham while we were there. We got to hear them in person one time. But it kind of speaks to the ladies in my life that have meant a lot, particularly Suzanne. She has been so gracious about saying, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Go. We can handle this while you're gone. And there was a good side to that. I could go, but there was also a bad side saying, maybe they can do this without me. And then I have 2 beautiful daughters and 3 beautiful granddaughters. And I think that's what's special about the song.
Let's hear the song, My Girl by the Temptations. That was the Temptations and My Girl. This is Grace Notes. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Dr. Larry Dempsey. Larry is on the board of Costa Rica Mission Projects. And Larry, if you could, before we went to the song, you were telling us a little bit about the prelude to your first visit to Costa Rica. Tell us the rest of the story.
Well, the first trip, as I said, I did not go on. And one of my best friends came back and was telling me about the trip. And basically this ministry at that time still is a construction ministry, building churches, parsonages, Sunday school classrooms, that kind of thing. And he was talking about the work they did, and yeah, that's fine, yeah, okay. But he also was telling me about the people of Costa Rica. He said they're a different type of people. Their faith is just something that really struck me. And my friend was a lot like me. He's kind of an outdoors person. We had fished a lot together over the years. And he said, you really need to go. You can stay in North Carolina and build stuff, but you need to go down and just witness these people's faith and what it really speaks to you. And I could tell by the way he was talking that it was kind of a special trip. But I was still kind of wavering because they were already making plans for the next year. And he said, and by the way, you do know we get a day off while we're there, right? He said, well, Costa Rica is the best place in the world to catch Pacific sailfish. And I said, count me in.
Fisherman that you are, that clinched the deal.
That was the tipping point. And looking back, I think everybody says God works in mysterious ways. I think this was one of those. I think I was being led to go on a mission trip. I was resisting for all the wrong reasons, and yet here is a fishing trip that actually tips the scale and started a journey that's lasted almost 30 years.
Tell us, Larry, give us some detail on what it is you do in Costa Rica.
It's mainly a construction ministry. People say, well, do you go on medical dental missions? And I didn't want to do that. I was practicing dentistry 12 months a year. I wanted to do something different. And this is basically a construction ministry. As I said, building churches, parsonages, and ancillary type buildings, Sunday school classrooms, and some school rooms. And you say, well, what does a dentist know about construction? Nothing. But they have people there, foremen, that kind of guide you along the way. And you don't go down there as a lay person like myself and they put you on a backhoe and say, okay, dig that trench over there. They do manual labor type stuff that you can do safely. But you do learn some stuff about building.
You mentioned before we came into the studio your work with the mission project at another town. You've bought some land through the projects and done some building that provides for various needs there. Tell us about that.
Well, let me give you a little history about Costa Rica Mission Projects. I think that would help. In the mid-'90s, and by that time, Suzanne and I were leading the trips to Costa Rica. We took a youth group down one summer, and one of the kids on that trip was a patient in my dental practice, and they were family friends. And he was maybe a junior, senior in college, headed nowhere. He was, as I called him, a surfing bum. And he went on a trip and came back, and that next year got on a sailboat to sail around the world. Well, they left the West Coast, got to Hawaii, hauled the boat out to do some repairs before they struck out across the Pacific, and they were in a boatyard doing some work. song comes on a Christian radio station, and he said, something hit me that told me I was not supposed to go any further than I was, that I was supposed to go back home. And he came back to North Carolina, went to divinity school at Duke, and he's now has Costa Rica mission projects in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica Mission Projects is a ministry through the United Methodist Church. It's entirely funded by itself. It does not receive any money from the Methodist Church of Costa Rica. It comes from the teams that come in each year. And each year, there are between 30 and 35 work teams that come to Costa Rica and work under Will. Now, the mission center that you were referring to, this ministry is basically in southwest Costa Rica, which is about 4 hours southwest of San Jose, the capital. And in the past, the work teams have stayed at local churches. Well, when you bring 20 or 25 people in to stay a week, it does a little bit of disrupting to their regular activities. So about 4 years ago, Costa Rica Mission Projects bought some land outside of San Isidro, and it took about 1.5 to 2 years, and we've built a center that has 3 dormitories that sleep anywhere from 75 to about 90 people. We have a big eating area, meeting room / all-purpose room. We have a cottage there for teenage girls that come to San Isidro looking for work and have no place to stay. And we can house as many as about 6 teenage girls. And this was kind of the project of Will's wife, Yolanda, who is a Costa Rican. She had been in a similar situation, coming out of the mountains down to a town, no place to stay, and had kind of struggled through that. And so her project was to have this home where these girls could come and stay at no charge, could live there, go to school, and actually have an education where they could have a job. So we have that home for the teenage girls, and we also have a daycare center that can house up to about 32 3 to 5-year-olds. And this we started so that there are a lot of single moms in the San Isidro area that would like to work, but they can't afford daycare. But it's a really nice daycare center. So it's more from purely a construction type ministry to obviously these other things that benefit the immediate community.
You've mentioned Will a couple of times. I take it he's the surfer bum you referred to earlier?
His name is Will Bailey. He's from an old North Carolina family, and he was just headed in all the wrong directions. And he just got a little guidance and has turned out. The ministry is really, it's a good thing.
It sounds like a good place to talk about another song that you've identified for us, Amazing Grace, the version by Judy Collins. Does that fit in here?
How appropriate. I think it's true especially of Will's journey, when I look back at where kind of he was headed, where a lot of us were headed, myself included. And I think sometimes God comes through a song in a boatyard, and then, sometimes he says, let's go catch Pacific sailfish. He works in mysterious ways, and I think it's part of each of our journeys, and that journey's still going on for all of us. I know especially for me as I get a little bit older, just how I'm going to fit in Suzanne and I both, how we're going to fit in the Costa Rica missions projects in the future.
Let's hear the song, Amazing Grace by Judy Collins. That was Amazing Grace by Judy Collins, written some 200 years actually before Judy Collins recorded it, written by John Newton. As you well know, Larry, John Newton, a former slave ship operator. Before we went to Amazing Grace, you were telling us about the construction work in Costa Rica. I understand you spent some time in El Salvador, too. Have I got that right?
I have. Will Bailey grew up in our church, and he is actually on the staff at First United Methodist Church, he and his wife both. Brian Dubberly and his wife Ellen are also on the staff at First Church in Rocky Mount, and they spent about 5 years ago set up a ministry in El Salvador. Ellen's father had been involved in missions work in the United Methodist Church for a number of years, and he had been to El Salvador several times and had talked to Brian. Brian had been working with Will in Costa Rica for a number of years, had actually lived there, I think, for a year one time with Will. But he felt led to have his own ministry, and his father-in-law said, go to El Salvador and look. And Brian went, and the need there is incredible. El Salvador is in Central America, up north of Costa Rica, and it's a different country. It's a very congested country. I've been there 4 or 5 times, and it just seems like there's people everywhere. And there's some danger there. It's not news, pretty much common knowledge that it can be a difficult place to get around in. And Brian and Ellen have just done an incredible job there. They have between 30 and 40 work teams each year, very similar to Will. It's a construction ministry. Come each year. In addition to the construction, they have a medical dental ministry, and they also have what's called a beans and rice ministry, where they actually go out and distribute food in areas where people don't have enough to eat. And there's some evangelizing that goes on these trips. It's a unique ministry. I have enjoyed going there. Their Spanish is not quite the same, but I can get around. And it's just a little bit different than Costa Rica, but a very good ministry.
Is your involvement there on the construction side?
Yes. What Brian does there is he will build shelters for families. In other words, if a work team wants to go there and work with Brian, they will buy the materials to build like a box house. It is just a structure. There is no indoor plumbing. There's no water, no electricity. But he will build them a shelter, because a lot of people in El Salvador don't have that. They've got cardboard or tin that they're living under. So he will build them a shelter, and then they, over time, can get help and actually finish the house out.
Let me shift gears here for a minute or two and ask you, why do you do what you do in Costa Rica and El Salvador?
I don't know. I think there was a time, even when I had a dental practice going, that I felt inclined to be doing something else. One of the Dempsey characteristics is I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to be hard-headed about the thing. And I kept going one way, but I kept feeling tugged in another direction. One time I actually went to Durham and interviewed at the divinity school and decided that wasn't for me. And I just felt like I was supposed to be doing something in missions. Costa Rica just felt right to me. And it was something that, even with a busy schedule that we had with the dental practice and the children, that my wife and I could both be actively involved in, and our family could be involved in it. 2 of the children have been down there several times, and it's been a journey. It hadn't always been easy. It seems like there's always something that comes up that we should be doing, but following the trip, looking back, you say, I did the right thing. So we're just kind of excited about now, as we're getting a little bit older, kind of where we're headed now.
Is there anything you can say in the way of recommendations or suggestions to those of us who are here in North Carolina and not doing that kind of traveling or that kind of work internationally?
Well, I think overseas ministry is not for everybody. You have to have time. You have to have a very supportive family. And there are people who go on trips with us who come back and say, I had a good time, but that's just not for me. And that's okay. I think God gives each of us different talents. And I just felt like that our talent has been in overseas ministry and in Costa Rica. But there are plenty of opportunities right outside this door and right around the towns or the communities where you live. I think the talents that we have, we're supposed to use. And I hope that's where Suzanne and I have been, and I hope that's where we're going in the future, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So if you say, there's no way I can go to Costa Rica or I can go to Africa or wherever, you can go locally and help. Every church has mission projects, and everybody can be involved in some form or fashion. And not just you, but get your children involved. There's so much that goes on now that's negative about our children. But if you can get involved in one of these ministries and see the youth group that Suzanne and I carry down there every summer. If you could go on one of those and see what those kids do down there, you'd feel pretty good about the youth in this country.
Your comments remind me of what you were telling me about this third song that you've identified, Wildflowers by Jimmy Buffett. Tell us why that song is special to you.
First of all, I'm a Jimmy Buffett fan.
That'll work.
As my daughter says, there are other artists. It just speaks to, just like a wildflower. I mean, just being free. And everybody says, well, you know, what about that being free, just willy-nilly, do whatever you want to do? To me, that's not freedom. Freedom, to me, is living that life that you were destined to live out that call. And for Suzanne and I, that's been Costa Rica Mission Projects. They say, gosh, you know, you spend a lot of time during the year raising money for these trips, and you spend time away from here, away from there, doing this and doing that. But to me, that's freedom, because that's what we were supposed to do. And when we do this, even though at the time it may seem crunched and difficult to squeeze in, when you're finished, you know it was the right thing. And this song, to me, that Wildflower song, speaks to that.
So for all of us, whether it's in Costa Rica or whether it's right outside the office door, the song speaks to that matter of being free through doing what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Well, Larry, it's been a privilege to have you here today. Our guest has been Dr. Larry Dempsey. Larry, we wish you well in your future endeavors, and thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's hear the song, Wildflowers, sung by Jimmy Buffett, written by Tom Petty.
You belong right here. Thank you, everybody.
You've been listening to Grace Notes, a special program here on Life 103.1 featuring people who may be relatively unknown, but who meet life's challenges in ways that brighten the lives of those around them. Our producer is Christina Dolan. I'm Alan Button, and we invite you to join all of us here at the station again next Friday at 5:30 for Grace Notes on Life 103.1.